her problem is she can't earn any money anymore. She made her money selling the dirt on the royal family, much of it, of course, in my view, invented.
Prince Harry had faced hostile crowds, unforgiving headlines, and cold palace corridors before. But this time, the most unsettling detail was not what happened around him. It was who was missing from his side, and why no one close to the couple seemed willing to explain it. Harry arrived alone at a moment that had been expected to project confidence. Meghan's presence had reportedly been anticipated, not simply as his wife, but as the other half of the partnership they had spent years defending. Yet when Harry stepped forward, the space beside him remained empty. It was impossible to ignore. That absence quickly became more powerful than any statement his team could have prepared. Harry tried to hold his composure. His expression was controlled, his words careful, and his movements measured. But every pause invited another question. Every strained smile was examined for hidden meaning. Commentators searched for clues, photographers watched for signs of distress, and royal observers studied him with the patience of people who understood how much could be revealed without a single confession. The explanations began almost immediately. One source suggested Meghan had remained behind because of family responsibilities. Another claimed a scheduling conflict had made her attendance impossible. Others described the decision as strategic, arguing that the couple had chosen to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. But beneath those polished excuses, a darker possibility began to spread. There had reportedly been a private disagreement, one neither Harry nor Meghan wanted dragged into public view. The timing could hardly have been worse. Harry was already waiting for a major decision that threatened to damage his professional future and reopen old wounds connected to his royal departure. The Sussexes had survived years of criticism by presenting themselves as a united force. When one was attacked, the other stood close. When pressure rose, they answered together. That pattern had become central to their public identity. Now, for the first time, Harry appeared exposed. Inside palace circles, the silence was reportedly watchful rather than indifferent. Figures who had followed Harry's battles since he left royal life understood the meaning of the moment. Without Meghan beside him, he looked less protected, less certain, and more isolated than he had in years. Some believed the empty space signaled nothing. Others suspected it revealed a fracture that had been hidden behind carefully managed appearances. But the public event was only the surface. Shortly before Harry stepped out alone, he had allegedly received a troubling private message. Its exact wording remained unknown, yet those close to the situation claimed his mood shifted almost immediately. Whatever confidence he had carried into the day appeared to weaken. He had been given news he could not ignore, but there was no time to withdraw. He had to continue, smile, and pretend the ground beneath him had not moved. And that was when Meghan's absence became impossible to dismiss as coincidence. She may not have simply missed the occasion. She may have deliberately chosen not to stand beside Harry during the most dangerous moment of his post-royal life. But to understand why Meghan was absent, the story must return to the private warning Harry received before the cameras began, and the decision that may have pushed the couple into unfamiliar territory. Hours before Harry stepped into public view, a message allegedly reached him through private channels. It was brief, carefully worded, and devastating. Something he had spent months protecting was beginning to collapse, and the people once promising support were suddenly creating distance when he needed them most. Until that moment, Harry had been told the crisis could still be contained. His advisors had spoken of options, private negotiations, and possible compromises. They had encouraged him to remain patient, insisting that the final decision had not yet been made. Even when warning signs began to appear, Harry held tightly to the belief that reason would eventually prevail. The message destroyed that confidence. A key figure connected to his professional future and wider legal strategy was reportedly preparing to withdraw support. The language was cautious, but the meaning was unmistakable. Harry was losing more than a useful ally. He was losing the protection of someone whose involvement had given his position weight, credibility, and the appearance of momentum. The consequences could spread quickly. One failure might weaken future partnerships. It could damage his charitable ambitions, complicate his security fight, and strengthen critics who claimed that his influence had faded since leaving royal duties. Harry had spent years building an identity outside the monarchy. Now, a single reversal threatened to make that independence look far more fragile than he had ever admitted. For Harry, it carried the sting of another rejection. He had already fought against palace restrictions, hostile coverage, and painful distance from members of his own family. Each battle had demanded sacrifice. Each defeat reopened the same private wound, the fear that no matter how far he moved from royal control, the consequences of his departure would continue to follow him. Meghan reportedly understood the danger immediately. She did not see the message as one isolated problem. She saw the headlines it could create, the questions it would revive, and the pressure that would fall on both of them. Standing beside Harry might project unity, but it could also pull her into a crisis that was already threatening their shared reputation. That was where loyalty collided with survival. Harry wanted them to appear together. He believed their presence as a couple would show strength and deny critics the image of isolation they were waiting to exploit. Meghan, however, reportedly feared that a public display would only increase attention and turn a professional defeat into a personal spectacle. Their advisors were divided. Some demanded confidence, arguing that absence would look like panic. Others warned that one poorly timed appearance could deepen the damage. Beneath those competing strategies, older frustrations began rising again. Sacrifice, blame, public exposure, and the cost of battles that never seemed to end. The setback had not arrived without warning. For weeks there had been delays, colder conversations, and carefully avoided commitments. Harry had noticed them. He simply refused to believe they would end in rejection. As the warnings settled over them, Harry and Meghan were forced into a choice they had avoided for years: stand together and absorb the damage publicly, or separate their appearances and risk creating an even more dangerous story. Behind a closed door, the conversation reportedly shifted from strategy to survival. Harry wanted reassurance that they would face the moment together. Meghan wanted clarity about what his latest battle would cost their family. Neither raised their voice at first, but the silence between them became impossible to ignore. Harry believed Meghan's presence would answer every question before it could be asked. If they appeared together, the message would be simple: they remained united, confident, and impossible to divide. He feared that walking into the event alone would create a story far larger than the setback itself. Critics would question their marriage, their shared mission, and whether the partnership that had carried them through years of turmoil was beginning to weaken. Meghan saw the danger differently. Standing beside him might offer reassurance for one afternoon, but it could pull her into another crisis she had not created and could not control. Once her name entered the headlines, the original issue would disappear. The focus would shift to her expression, her loyalty, and whether she had influenced Harry's decisions. She had lived through that pattern before, and she reportedly had no desire to repeat it. Then, the conversation became more personal. Meghan questioned how often public unity had required her to absorb the emotional weight of Harry's unfinished struggle with the palace. She had left Britain, endured the loss of royal protection, watched family relationships collapse, and carried years of suspicion from people determined to blame her. Their commercial future was under pressure. Their private life remained exposed. Even their children's security had become part of a wider battle neither of them could fully escape. There were other concerns as well. Meghan was said to be exhausted, focused on family responsibilities, and determined to protect business decisions already under intense scrutiny. Her absence could be part boundary, part strategy, and part recognition that their old method was no longer working. Harry understood her reasoning, but understanding did not remove the pain. At the moment he most needed visible support, her caution felt like distance. Meghan viewed it as protection. Harry experienced it as abandonment. Advisors offered carefully prepared explanations. They could cite scheduling pressures, family commitments, or separate professional obligations. Meghan rejected anything that might later appear misleading. She would not allow another temporary excuse to become a permanent source of suspicion. That refusal reopened every sacrifice they had made. Harry insisted they had always survived by standing together. Meghan answered that survival could not mean walking willingly into every storm. Then, she reportedly said the words that changed the conversation: this setback was not temporary, and they had to stop pretending every crisis could be defeated through public defiance. Harry had no immediate reply. He left without the promise he wanted, carrying the knowledge that he would soon face the cameras alone. When Harry finally appeared without Meghan, the mystery surrounding her absence exploded, but the real shock was still hidden inside the decision he had just been forced to accept. Then, the truth broke through the carefully managed silence. Harry had not suffered a minor delay or temporary embarrassment. He had received a decisive rejection, one that threatened his plans, weakened his position, and reopened the deepest wound of his royal departure: the fear that he could never truly escape palace power. The setback centered on a crucial decision Harry had believed would strengthen his security, protect his independence, and confirm that his position still carried institutional weight. For months, he had reportedly been assured that his arguments were being taken seriously. He had trusted the process, defended the strategy, and told close allies that the outcome would finally prove his critics wrong. Instead, the decision went against him. This was not merely a disappointing result. It threatened the foundation of the life Harry had tried to build beyond royal control. His freedom to operate on his own terms now appeared weaker. Future partnerships could become more cautious. Financial plans might require reconsideration. Most painfully, the personal mission he had presented as a fight for protection and fairness had suffered a public defeat. To Harry, the rejection carried a darker meaning. It seemed to confirm his belief that the old establishment still had the power to shape his future. He had left royal duties, crossed an ocean, and created a separate public identity. Yet the influence of the institution appeared impossible to escape. Every road forward somehow seemed to lead back toward the palace. Meghan reportedly understood that danger before the public did. She knew Harry's appearance would no longer be treated as an ordinary engagement. It would become a spectacle of loss, with every gesture examined for humiliation. She chose not to attend because she refused to become the visible shield for another setback rooted in Harry's unfinished royal conflict. Her decision was strategic, but it was also deeply personal. Meghan had spent years becoming the first target whenever Harry's battles intensified. This time, she would not stand beside him merely to absorb the questions, soften the headlines, and prove loyalty to strangers demanding another public performance. Harry's team moved quickly. Their language emphasized determination, focus, and future options. They insisted he remained committed to his work and prepared to consider his next step. But those controlled assurances could not conceal the pressure. His responses were shorter. His manner was guarded. The disappointment beneath his composure was difficult to hide. Inside palace circles, there were whispers that the outcome had been anticipated. Some figures had reportedly prepared for an angry response, while others viewed the defeat as evidence that Harry's influence had declined since leaving Britain. For Harry, the humiliation now had two faces. He had lost the decision he expected to win, and he had faced its consequences without Meghan beside him. The reversal was even harsher because he had privately promised allies that victory was near. Worse still, the defeat threatened to trigger another wave of pressure. financial uncertainty, private resentment, and damaging questions about whether Harry's public battles were protecting the Sussex brand or slowly consuming it. Yet the rejection itself was only the first blow, because once Meghan's absence became inseparable from Harry's defeat, the crisis shifted from a professional setback into a deeply personal test of loyalty, identity, and survival. For years, Meghan had been blamed for Harry's decisions, his distance from the monarchy, and every controversy surrounding their new life. But behind the latest absence was a harsher truth. She no longer wanted to stand in front of a storm created by battles Harry still could not release. Her decision not to appear beside him was not the result of a forgotten obligation or an unavoidable conflict. It was a boundary. Meghan had begun to believe that every time Harry entered another public fight, her presence changed the story in the worst possible way. His original problem would fade, and the attention would turn toward her motives, her influence, and whether she had pushed him into confrontation. She had seen it happen too many times. Whenever Harry suffered a setback, Meghan's loyalty became part of the public trial. If she stood beside him, critics accused her of controlling the message. If she remained silent, they called her cold. If she defended him, she became the cause of the conflict. The cost was always personal, yet the demand remained the same: appear, smile, and prove the marriage was strong enough to survive another crisis. This time, Meghan refused. She believed supporting Harry privately did not require placing herself inside every public disaster. Her own projects, reputation, and long-term plans were already under pressure. Appearing beside him during a visible defeat could drag those ambitions into a battle centered on his security fears, legal frustration, and continuing struggle with the royal establishment. Harry understood the logic, but emotionally he could not separate her reasoning from the empty space beside him. They had once promised to face hostile institutions together. That promise had carried them through their departure from Britain and the years of criticism that followed. Now, at the moment he felt most wounded, Meghan's absence seemed to challenge the very foundation of their partnership. Their disagreement went deeper than one appearance. Meghan reportedly questioned how long their future could remain tied to Harry's royal grievances, legal battles, security concerns, and unresolved pain with his family. She wanted their life to move toward independent work, their children, and a stability that did not depend on the palace's next decision. Harry faced a more painful question. If he stopped fighting, what remained of the identity he had built after leaving royal life? His battles had become more than disputes. They had become proof, at least to him, that the sacrifices had meaning. Letting go could feel like surrendering the story that justified everything they had lost. Meghan warned him that anger would make the setback worse. Another public attack could deepen the damage, frighten partners, and hand the palace the reaction it expected. Her absence was therefore not only a message to the media, it was a message to Harry. She would stand with him in private, but she would no longer automatically march into every public war. That boundary changed everything. Harry now had to decide whether to alter his course or continue fighting without the visible protection he had once taken for granted. Meghan's decision may have protected her from the immediate fallout, but it left Harry exposed to something even more dangerous: the quiet satisfaction of those inside royal circles who believed time was finally turning against him. No official palace statement mentioned Harry's defeat or Meghan's absence. None was needed. Behind the silence, courtiers reportedly followed every development, measured every headline, and understood that Harry's latest setback had achieved what years of public confrontation could not. It had left him isolated without palace intervention. Inside Buckingham Palace, the response was disciplined and cold. Aides avoided public comment, knowing that even a single sentence could give Harry something to challenge. Silence served the institution better. It allowed questions about Meghan's absence, Harry's weakened position, and the future of the Sussexes to grow without placing the monarchy directly inside the dispute. That silence was not emptiness, it was power. Some courtiers reportedly believed Harry had exhausted much of the sympathy that once followed his departure. In their view, too many personal disappointments had been presented as battles against the palace. Each accusation may once have created shock, but repetition had changed the effect. The institution had learned that refusing to respond could be more effective than defending itself. Yet not everyone inside the family was unmoved. There were said to be private concerns about Harry's emotional state and the pressures surrounding him. His anger had always hidden something deeper: grief, fear, and the belief that he had been abandoned by those who should have protected him. For King Charles, the conflict was especially painful. A father might want to reach out. A monarch could not act so freely. Any direct support risked being interpreted as interference, weakness, or an admission that Harry's claims had merit. Charles was therefore caught between personal concern and the duty to protect the crown. William remained more distant. He reportedly believed Harry had chosen an independent life and must accept the consequences of decisions made outside royal control. From his perspective, family sympathy could not become permanent rescue. Meghan's absence was also being closely examined. Palace advisors allegedly viewed it as evidence that the Sussex strategy was shifting under pressure. If Meghan no longer intended to stand beside Harry during every conflict, then Harry's position outside the monarchy might be more vulnerable than it appeared. That possibility raised a dangerous question. Would Harry eventually seek renewed contact, security reassurance, financial support, or some limited form of cooperation with the family he had publicly challenged? An old offer was rumored to remain available. It promised no return to royal status and no public apology. It offered only private assistance under strict conditions, discretion, restraint, and an end to sudden attacks. Harry had once considered such terms humiliating. Then a secret message reportedly arrived from someone connected to the royal family. It offered sympathy, but also a warning. Do not answer this defeat by attacking the monarchy. Was it compassion, or an attempt to control him while he was weakened? The palace's silence gave Harry no target, no argument, and no easy path forward, but the private message that followed forced him to confront an option he had spent years rejecting. The message did not promise restoration, apology, or revenge. It offered something far more complicated: a narrow path back toward private cooperation with the family. But only if Harry stopped turning every royal dispute into a public confrontation. The conditions struck directly at his pride and his deepest fear. The proposal reportedly came through a trusted intermediary, someone distant enough to protect the palace but close enough to be taken seriously. It suggested that practical cooperation was still possible. Private communication could resume, certain concerns might be discussed, limited help could be considered. But the offer was carefully restricted, and there was no mistaking what it did not include. Harry would not return to royal duties. His former status would not be restored. There would be no public apology, triumphant reconciliation, or admission that the palace had treated him unfairly. The monarchy was not inviting him back into the life he had left. It was offering a controlled relationship from the outside. The conditions were even harder to accept. Harry would be expected to reduce public accusations, avoid surprise disclosures, protect private conversations, and accept boundaries designed by the institution he no longer trusted. To him, the message felt less like peace and more like surrender. It had arrived when his position was weakest, making him suspect that the palace was using defeat to silence him. Meghan reportedly viewed the situation with greater caution. Refusing every compromise had not freed them from the monarchy. It had trapped them in permanent conflict with it. Each new dispute pulled them backward, damaged their plans, and forced their future to depend on another reaction from London. That difference opened a painful divide. Harry saw cooperation as proof that pressure had worked against him. Meghan saw it as maturity, or at least a chance to stop the cycle before it consumed everything they had built. Harry was haunted by what acceptance might suggest. Critics would say he had failed independently and returned for help when his options narrowed. Yet rejection carried its own cost: financial strain, uncertain security, professional damage, and an exhaustion neither he nor Meghan could continue hiding. Her earlier absence now took on another meaning. Perhaps Meghan had refused to appear because Harry needed to make this choice without using her as the public face of resistance. He could no longer fight simply because they had always fought together. For a moment, he reportedly considered answering immediately. Anger offered clarity. A public response could restore the sense of control the rejection had taken from him. Then he remembered Meghan's warning: do not react from humiliation. An unnamed ally reinforced that caution, urging Harry to step away from confrontation, rebuild credibility slowly, and allow silence to do what outrage no longer could. The choice before him was brutal. Accepting the offer might end one war but damage his pride. Rejecting it might preserve his defiance while accelerating the collapse already threatening his future. By nightfall, Harry was no longer deciding how to answer one rejection. He was deciding whether the identity he built through resistance could survive the compromise required to protect everything still standing around him. When the cameras disappeared and the official statements ended, Harry returned to a quieter reality. Meghan was still absent from public view, the setback remained painfully real, and the palace had offered no rescue. For the first time, he had to consider whether fighting harder might cost him more than losing. The conversation between Harry and Meghan resumed without advisors, prepared explanations, or public demands. Harry reportedly admitted that appearing alone had wounded him more deeply than the rejection itself. The decision had damaged his plans. But Meghan's absence had made the defeat feel personal. In that empty space, he had felt every doubt surrounding their marriage, their strategy, and the future they had promised to build together. Meghan insisted that her absence had not been punishment. It had been a warning. Their pattern of responding to every threat with another appearance, statement, or confrontation was becoming impossible to sustain. Emotionally, it kept them trapped inside old pain. Professionally, it allowed every project to be overshadowed by another royal dispute. Harry struggled with what stepping back would mean. His battles were tied to more than pride. They were connected to his mother's memory, his anger toward the institution, and the story he had told about why leaving became necessary. To stop fighting could feel like abandoning Diana, excusing the palace, or admitting that years of resistance had changed nothing. Meghan challenged that belief. Healing, she reportedly argued, could not require endless confrontation. Protecting Diana's memory did not mean allowing every unresolved wound to control their future. Nor did silence always equal surrender. Sometimes, refusing to react could deny the palace and the press the conflict they expected. The couple agreed to a temporary shift. There would be fewer reactive appearances, tighter control over private information, and greater attention placed on independent work. Their children, long-term security, and professional future would move closer to the center. The monarchy would no longer be allowed to dominate every decision. They remained united, but the meaning of unity had changed. Meghan would support Harry privately, yet she would not automatically appear beside him whenever a controversy erupted. Harry would have to face certain battles on his own, or decide they were no longer worth fighting. The palace offer remained unanswered. Whether Harry would accept limited cooperation, reject the conditions, or prepare another confrontation was still uncertain. His setback had exposed a painful weakness. Without an institution protecting him, every defeat became personal, and every absence became symbolic. The public continued debating whether Meghan had abandoned him, protected herself, or forced him toward a reckoning he had resisted for years. The true loss was not merely the decision. It was the discovery that outrage, defiance, and united appearances could no longer guarantee control. Harry's next move might be quieter, but beneath that silence, another royal collision could already be forming. And as the palace waited, Meghan remained unseen, and Harry considered his next move. One question lingered above every carefully controlled silence. Had this crushing setback finally broken their old strategy or created the conditions for their most unpredictable decision yet?